So welcome to our latest episode of What Makes a Difference. And we are lucky to have on is a friend of mine is Karen, and she goes to the Bath Armed Forces and Veterans Breakfast Club.
Lovely to have you, Karen.
Would you like to give a bit of an introduction about yourself?
My name's Karen. I joined the army when I was 17, actually on my 17th birthday. One of the reasons was to get away from an abusive stepfather, which after a year being in the army, my mum divorced anyway. But I stayed in. I had some really good times in the army, and I also had some very dark times. I served in Germany, Northern Ireland, then I went to Bulford, then back to Germany. Over the 7 years, I saw a lot of different things. I served with the SIB, which is the Special Investigation Branch, which deal with more serious crimes, murder, drugs. Not that there was that much drugs around in those days. They were just starting. Road traffic accidents, deaths from road traffic accidents. I spent 18 months in Northern Ireland. That was an experience in the 70s, of which I have a medal, which I was very proud of. And then we went to Hamel. I got married to an RMP corporal in Bulford. I was due to get promoted, but because of different messes and different postings, we decided that I wouldn't get promoted to sergeant, even though I would have been probably the youngest WREC provost sergeant at the time. In many ways, I never forgave him for that, because as soon as I came out, he did everything that he wanted to do, CP, going abroad. I got pregnant when I was in Hamel, and I was very, very lucky that I could stay in. When you go to a posting, you normally with the RMP, you work a shift and you're with those people and you get to know them, and then you get to know their wives. Then you get invited round for dinner. You have the singlies round to you for Christmas dinner, and it's one big family. When I got pregnant, I was lucky enough because I had a really, really good boss to stay in until I was 8 months pregnant. I fought tooth and nail to stay in because I wanted a career, but unfortunately in those days you weren't allowed to stay in. So I had no support from the army whatsoever, no resettlement courses, no interviews. It was just, you're pregnant, you got to get out. When we came out, I came out on the 8th of January. Joanna was born on the 23rd of February, 2 weeks late. 5 days later, we were posted to Ballykelly, and I was so lonely because you're used to making friends with the blokes you work with and obviously their wives. And all of a sudden, I didn't know anybody. If I was in the garden hanging the washing out and the neighbour came out, I would run back in. It took me a long time to get used to now being a wife and not knowing anybody. I mean, eventually you join the wives' clubs, but a lot of the women were a lot older and they don't want a woman with a baby. So I found that really, really hard. A year later, I had my son. So then I had 2 babies to contend with, and we were posted from Ballykelly to Londonderry. Then my husband did his CP course. So then we were posted to Lisbon. Lisbon, we went to Cyprus. Cyprus, we went to Detmold, and he went off again to Uganda. And that was the end of our marriage. I met John, and we've been together for 35 years. And really, that's sort of a really short of my life within the forces. So I had some really good times, but I had some really bad times as well.
So that transition then, going from serving to then going, oh, we don't want to know you anymore, that must have been pretty tough.
I hated it. I really did. I so wanted to stay in because I had a career. And I think getting married, because I was only, was I 21 when I got married? So I was quite young, but because the way the army worked back in the 70s, you weren't automatically given a posting with your husband. We were very lucky. Hamel, where I went to, they were crying out for girls. And I was, other than the Dr. Averill, I was the first girl to be posted there. And so there wasn't even a married quarter for us. The sergeant's mess wouldn't let me stay in the sergeant's mess because Bob could have stayed in the corporal's mess. So we had to go and live with another pad, which was really awkward because I was doing nights with her husband while my husband was sat at home with his wife, and he used to go home every 5 minutes to check. But yeah, it's really daunting, that fact that you've got this ready-made family and then you've got nothing. And you get really depressed. And when you've got a baby as well, it is so hard. I mean, when I had Joe, after I'd had Joe, I probably wouldn't have wanted to stay in. But leading up to her birth, I so wanted to stay in, and you just weren't allowed to.
Yeah.
And I know that's all changed now. I mean, there's a lot changed within the forces now.
It's a lot more supportive. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when John came out, that's my husband now. He came out in 90, I think it was 92, 93. He took the first phase redundancy. Yeah. And the amount of courses that they sent him on and the amount of support he had, I was like really shocked. And I'm thinking, well, why didn't I have any of that? But I think it was because I was in a very male-orientated unit. It was all engineers. I think it was 2-3 engineers. And I say there was only one other woman, and she was the Dr. Averill. And I always remember her name because when she walked across the parade square, all the guys would be hanging out the window, which they wouldn't be allowed to do now.
Yeah.
What strikes me, Karen, is that the reason you had to leave was because you were pregnant. Yeah,
that's true. Absolutely.
And yet, when you are pregnant is probably one of the biggest times when what you need is your community and your family around about you. Because the sheer changes, that alone is a massive change.
Yes. Yeah. But it impacts, it impacts also that, like when you've got like an army wage, I mean, it wasn't mega amounts in those days, but it was in relative terms. And then all of a sudden you think, I won't have my own money. I will have to actually ask my husband, can I buy that? And I got very depressed about 7 months. I actually went and had a little bit of counselling because it was like this big change. I mean, I wanted my baby, I wanted my daughter, and I wouldn't change that for the world now. She's given me the most beautiful grandchildren, and she's a very beautiful, caring person. But yes, it was a very male-orientated, absolutely.
Yeah, because your cat badge back then would have been WRAC, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I was WRAC Provo. So in those days you were attached to whatever. Yeah. So if you were signals, you'd be attached. So I was WRAC Provo. So I was attached to the Royal Military Police, doing the same job, but not getting the same wages, not getting the same benefits. I missed, I think you get a lump, you get like the men sign up for 8 years and then they get a payment. I missed mine by 2 days, but they wouldn't pay me for it. So,
which is ironic, isn't it? Because they were the ones that were telling you to leave.
Yeah. But it was a lot better because when Barbara, who also goes to the Breakfast Club, she joined in 1969. I think she got married in 70 and she had to leave the army because she got married. So there is things that have changed. One of my jobs I hated doing was you used to have to go and do WRAC room inspections. Now, we get the blame in that, but it's their OCs and their commanding officers that were saying, we want the SIB in, we want this stopped. And everyone complained about it, but those girls knew when they joined up that it was actually illegal to be in a same-sex relationship.
Yeah.
And now, obviously, the army has changed, and it is fine. You can be gay, lesbian, whatever you like to call it, and be in the army. And you can be married to your wife, and you can live in a married quarter. But in those days, you couldn't. It's just a sign of the times.
Yeah. In terms of that transition, then, because that means then that Karen, you've not only are you yourself a veteran, you've served, but you're a military wife.
Yes.
So it's almost kind of like you've experienced that lifestyle from all sides.
Yeah, and I was a naval brat as well.
So you've had a big three then, really?
Yes. Yeah, because my dad was always away. I think when my mum had me, he was away. He was on Britannia, and she didn't see him for 18 months. I was 18 months old when he came back. I've got the photo of him throwing me in the air. It's actually on the ship now. As you enter, that photo of my dad throwing me in the air, meeting me for the first time at 18 months. And my mum, by the time she was 21, had three of us, and he was still going away. In those days, they used to go away a lot longer than they do now, because if they were away for 18 months, they'd come back and say, oh, I want a divorce, and they would get it. But now they tend to only stay up for 6 to 8 months. So, my dad was in the Navy. I wanted to join the Navy, but they didn't come under regulating branch then. So then I went to the RAF, and the only job they had left was parachute packer. And I thought, I'm not going to be responsible for anyone else's life. And I really wanted to be a police person. So I joined the army, and I had to fight to get, they wanted me to be a stewardess. And I said, no, I want to be a policewoman. So I really had to work hard, and I did work hard, and I got there in the end. So,
yeah.
Just shows your determination.
All people see is that 6 months, go away on operation tour for 6 months. But what they don't see is that year or so of actual pre-deployment training that leads up to that. So the guys and girls nowadays are still away quite a lot.
We when I went to Northern Ireland, there was no training. You learnt on the job.
Yeah.
There was no Tin City, or I think there's one in Norfolk as well, because I did Northern Ireland training there with the Paras before they went. And the Gurkhas, that was an experience, because the Gurkhas were the baddies. That really was an experience. But yeah, you just got posted there. I mean, when I got posted there, I didn't know I was getting posted there. I phoned up the pay office to find out about my annual leave. And they said, well, you haven't got any annual leave. You're going to Northern Ireland in 2 weeks' time. And I went, I beg your pardon. So that was another unit, sort of a lot of bullying and stuff. But hey ho, it just makes you stronger and more determined to show them that that they were wrong. I'd be a major general if I'd stayed in.
When you're with the wives, how, they said they didn't accept you first off. How did you manage to get involved with their club? Because they can be very cliquey, can't they?
Well, do we want to see that, Rich? Bearing in mind that we will all be talking to Spice.
I know. it can be seen as a club where it can be rank orientated. So my husband is this, my husband is that, and that's kind of what they live off.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. You'll get the RSM's wife, and I think they forget that they're not the RSM. They're not anybody. They're just a woman at a social or at a club. When the Gulf War was on, my husband was away. He was in Cyprus guarding the British ambassador. I never went to any of the RMP wives clubs because of that problem. That I think it was a sergeant major. I don't think they had an RSM because it was a detachment. It was awful. I tended then to go to the Air Corps wives club where everybody was equal and everybody was treated the same. It didn't matter what rank your husband was. You could be a private or you could be the colonel's wife. Everyone was treated the same. And with the RMP, it wasn't. It never was. And I think a lot of women were in that position that you're stuck in a flat in a strange country. You've got no support. You've not got your family just down the road. And it is hard. It really is hard.
Yeah. Especially as well, if they know their husband's going to an operation tour somewhere, there's an extra concern and worry, stress of going, what's happening with him now? Is he okay?
Yeah. I mean, and I was lucky because I say Bob went to Cyprus. He was close protection, so he's guarding the British ambassador because they were worried about Scud missiles. The worst time was when he got posted to Beirut. That was in 80, I think it was about 86, 85, 86. That was the worst time for me. I was in Cyprus then with 2 children. They were a bit older. But I had a better support there because, again, it was some friends in the Air Corps, some WRC Provo girls that I'd known who were then themselves wives with children. So we'd known each other. So we had our own little sort of, I don't know, like you say, like a little clique, I suppose. But yeah, it is when you've got not that support. When Bob went to Cyprus, the chief clerk used to live opposite me, and he was not allowed to bring my mail, not even post it through the letterbox. I had to go into the unit. Mm-hmm. That's the mentality of what it was like, and I know it's not like that now.
I mean, I think this is where a lot of people, if they haven't experienced that, they kind of assume that when there's a deployment and you're posted overseas, they don't take into consideration the fact that actually that also then means that not only is the spouse in a foreign country, but the spouse then has the potential to be further isolated because their partner isn't there either. They might be in the same country, but they're not available. So now you've got new friendship circles, new jobs, new whatever to try and find and sort out, all surrounded by somewhere that's new with very, very little support system.
Yeah, that's quite true. And also there's no work either. Some people are fortunate enough to get jobs in the NAFI. I was fortunate enough at my last post in Germany, I became a school swimming instructor. But that was only by chance that we used to take the children swimming and I taught a little boy to swim. And then they said, oh, you can teach swimming. I have the qualification, but it's only for military pools. So, yeah. So I can teach you to swim, but only in a military pool.
Yeah. So as well is because you were moving around quite a lot.
Yes.
That can also have that knock-on effect with your children's education. Because a friend of mine he was out in Germany, they moved back and forth wherever else. And there was a gap in between his daughter's education from when he left Germany to when he got back over here in the UK. And the school said, oh, we'll meet that. But they never did. So they didn't realise why she was struggling at school, why she didn't have that part of her education was missing.
Yeah, that's quite true. When Joe started school in Shipton Bellinger, she did really, really well. And she had glowing reports. And then she started going to school in Detmold, so John Moggs School. And the teacher, been there about 3 months, she goes, I don't know how they can say your daughter is so good. I've got a child in my class who's reading Tolstoy's War and Peace. Colonel's son. So even in the schools, they're going, oh, well, he's a colonel's son, so he's better than her because she's a corporal's son, daughter. So it seems right. It seemed right across the board, and because obviously the teachers in Germany get to stay in the officers' mess. So you've got it. You had it right across the board.
So you've been the mother to military children, and you've been a military child.
Yes.
And so, how would you say that those experiences have shaped who you are? Because that's a very different lifestyle. There's very different, I suppose, expectations as well and experiences.
Yeah. I tend to just put things that have happened, sort of put it in a box and send it to sea, and I don't try and dwell on things. My husband tells war stories all the time. I don't want to live in the past. I want to live in the future, and I think it does. It makes you bitter, but if you're bitter, then you get depressed and you get miserable and mardy. I'm quite a happy person, so I just tend to say put it in a box and send it to sea. But other people, they might still be struggling.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way I was brought up. I had a strong mum, still have, bless her.
So there's quite a lot of movement in the military life.
Yeah.
What we hear a lot from people who have lived that military lifestyle is that sort of, I suppose, challenge of kind of itchy feet every 2 to 3 years, or the need to redecorate, or, because the cycle of moving is so ingrained part of life.
That's true. I bought my first house in 91. We sold it in 93, I think it was. We moved into our new house. And yeah, we decorated it every 3 years. But it was so nice to be sort of feet firmly on the ground. I got a full-time job. I went into retail, never done it before in my life, and really enjoyed it. And I started as a concession manager and ended up running quite big clothing shops at both ends of the spectrum. Mackay's, which is a Scottish firm from Paisley, or Mackay's. They used to call it Mackay's in England, but it's Mackay's, now known as Mac & Co. So that was like a cheaper end. And then I went to Hamill's, which was a very upmarket ladies' dress shop, and then went on to run stores. I got made redundant again. I think I've got made redundant 7 times since 1991. So now I'm looking forward to retiring.
Yeah, because
what
we often hear of, Karen, as well, is that because of the nature of the beast, moving around quite a bit, if the wife stays with the husband moving around, then generally there seems to be like a deficit within her career when they eventually do retire and move on from the forces. And it can be quite hard for that lady then to progress in a career that she started off.
Yeah. I mean, I did try and join the police force, I say, but they wouldn't have me because I'd had, I think I'd had an ulcer or something. And so though they were desperate, they weren't that desperate to have me. But my friend, who we met on our final interview with our Colonel Purton, she was pregnant as well. She did get in and she stayed in. I think she only got out about 5 years ago. So she stayed in. But it's things like pensions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm lucky. When I got out, my pension said £2.10 a week, but I have got a military pension. It's not a huge amount, but it is an amount. If I'd have stayed in, obviously then I'd have got a lot more. Yeah. But we manage. We've got no debt. We own the boat. We own our car. At the Breakfast Club.
You certainly do.
Do you think, Karen, that lifestyle...
Some more than others.
I was just going to say that constant move, do you see that impact in terms of your children as well, in terms of maybe where they stay and how they seem to move, or is that something they seem to be able to manage around and hasn't had the same impact?
I think most children, they are they just accept it and get on with it. They my two make friends very easily, but they're like me. They don't have a huge lot of friends. They'll have one or two or three that are really good friends. I think it affected James more, especially when we went to Germany, because he did have some really good friends. He would have been about, I'm trying to think how old he was when we moved, probably about 6 or 7. He found it harder moving to Germany. Then his dad went away for 6 months, and that really did affect him. Mm-hmm. He used to get moody. I don't know how many times he trashed his room and then had to tidy it up again. So, yes, it does affect children, but different children in different ways. Joanna, it never bothered her moving schools because she can make friends really easy. But James, it did affect him.
Well, I can only imagine how stressful that is. I mean, I changed schools a few times myself, but I didn't change country and I didn't change home at the same time.
Yeah.
You put all of that into the equation, and you're changing friend circles, and that can be very, very stressful for anybody. It's stressful for an adult, never mind for a child.
Yeah, I mean, we had the same problem. I went to, I think it was about 10 different schools, from starting then as it was infant school right through to senior school. Senior school, I went to 3 different senior schools. I mean, the circumstances were a bit different because my mum and dad split up and I was living with my Gran. And then I never realised at the time how old she was. And now I look back at it and I think, oh, gosh, she was very brave to take on 3 children. But in the end, she moved. And so we went to live with my dad, went to another school, and then my dad, we moved to my mum's, and we were sort of a bit between pillar and post. So, it is stressful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as I said earlier, that can have a deficit on education. So you may not get the qualifications required to do a job that you might be looking to do. So there's that ongoing impact.
Yeah. Joanna she failed her A-level, but she did go on to do her A-levels. James, all he wanted to do was go to work. He applied for apprenticeship at Boscombe Down, and he missed it by, I think, 3 points or something. And they said, come back the next year. But he would not go to college. He would not go to college to help him get his apprenticeship. He wanted to go to Waitrose to work, get some money. When he did go back, they wouldn't take him because he hadn't furthered his education. And there was he then was going to go in the RAF, but he didn't really want to go in the RAF, and he just wasn't interested. Bless him, he started as a tyre fitter. He did a apprenticeship with them, and he now is a service manager earning mega bucks. So, but he wasn't, I don't know whether it's just a boy thing, a bit lazy, could do it if he wanted to, but didn't want to. And I think changing schools, I think he went to 6 different schools. It really affected his education.
It's not having that stability, is it? It's that constant movement.
No. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Well, I suppose as a child, it's hard enough making choices that are going to impact your entire life when you're 13, 14. Because that's where you're picking subjects that are going to determine what you do or don't do next.
Yeah.
I mean, you throw into that mix the fact that, well, I might be picking these subjects, but there's no guarantee those subjects will be available in that combination at my next school. or that I'll be able to continue, or they'll teach me the same way, then it can become very challenging. Then you throw into the mix that thought of, well, what if I go to college and I might start off college being able to live at home, but what happens if my family's deployed again? They move.
Yeah.
Do I go with them? Do I change college? Do I stay here? There's all of those complexities of decisions and thinking within that too.
I think that is why a lot of wives say, I'm not going. I want to stay. And they tend to stay in the UK. And then obviously the marriage breaks down because you've got the husband in Germany who can't come back every weekend. And then the wife staying in the UK with the children.
So when you finally left the military, Karen, and at that point, then you were raising a young family. You were still part and parcel of that military lifestyle, but from a different entry point to it.
Yes.
In terms of that change, if you had to say what the biggest impact on you of that was, what would you say that? I'm not putting this very well, Rich, so you can help me out here. It's almost kind of like,
what was the biggest impact that happened on you for that change from leaving the forces to
being a civvy? Loneliness. Very, very lonely.
Yeah.
When I was in UK, it was fine because I could drive up to Bristol to see my in-laws or drive home to my parents. My mum used to come and visit all the time. But when you're in Germany, unless they've planned to come out on holiday, you don't see anybody. And especially at weekends, that was the worst time, because at weekends, your friends, their husbands may be home. So sort of from Friday picking the kids up from school, you probably wouldn't see anybody until Monday morning when you take them back to school. So you get very, very lonely.
And again, if the wives aren't accepting of you and your children, that can make it even worse. Because otherwise, if you're part of a group, you can go, okay, I can maybe pop over and see Sandra or Jenny or whatever her name might be. But if you've not got that community around you, you say it's very isolating, and even more so, especially if you've just got your children with you.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. An example, I was doing shopping in Andover, bashed my head on the boot of the car, blood everywhere, rushed to hospital, stitched up. I actually drove home even though I shouldn't, picked the children up from school because I was shopping on a Friday afternoon. And I'd actually phoned the lady across the road who was my friend and said, this has happened. And she didn't come to see me until Sunday afternoon to borrow a cup of sugar. And I won't tell you what I said to her because I wasn't very polite. And I'm thinking, you know that I've got 8 stitches in my head. You know that I've got 2 young children to look after. And you couldn't be bothered to come and make sure I was all right. And that's what it was like. Very lonely.
It's almost like even the community you're meant to be a part of, you're meant to be able to be included in, you can't. So it's almost, it feels almost like a further exclusion, a further not fitting in.
Yeah, it is that thing that if your husband's away, and then come the weekend, their husbands are home, then you won't see anybody.
Do you think there was a difference within that because you had served first? Is there almost like a difference between or was there between the wives who had been wives but hadn't served, or those that had served and were wives?
I think, probably right. I think you probably find the ones that had served and were wives tended to be more together than the women that had just joined up or just married a serviceman. there was that sort of distinction line down the middle.
I mean, I know certainly if I look at the support networks now, things like the Forces Wives and the spouse networks seem to be very, very different now to what you're describing when this was your experience. So I would like to think that they're an awful lot more inclusive and an awful lot more welcoming than you obviously experienced at that time, particularly with young children.
Yeah. I think that sometimes because you were serving, or you did serve, that they sort of maybe look down their nose at you a little bit. Some of the wives.
Yeah, I'd say there is a lot more support out there because they've had to. Yeah, it may take 2 or 3 generations.
That's right, where everything has to progress.
It does, yeah. It may take 2 or 3 generations for that support to be there, but it would eventually catch up.
Yeah. I mean, my mum had no support whatsoever. They didn't have wives' clubs or anything like that. And I remember as a little girl, she had to go to hospital. I mean, I can't remember what it was for. And I was probably about 4 or 5. And the only reason I remember was because it was called the Clark 5. It was like a kindergarten, but they didn't have those sort of things in those days. And we went there, and they had this huge rocking horse. And I always remember sitting on this huge rocking horse, not wanting to get off, while she went off to hospital. So she had no support. And my dad was at sea for 18 months. I dread to think what it was like for her. So things did have to change, and slowly they have. They've got much better.
Yeah.
I think the big challenge still remains about that managing that career, isn't it? So that you, if that's what you wish to do, if you wish a career, you can still pursue that, because those deployments, those moves.
But then this day, that's a lot easier, isn't it? Because you can work remotely, and they do know. I do know that they do have these offices where people can get to, and they have like hot desks where you can meet up with other people who do different work in different areas. So they've got all that going on as well.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a definite change in that, and I think COVID, weirdly enough, probably helped a lot with that, because it pushed everybody into that idea that remote working was possible. But I still think, though, that there's that issue of frequent job changes and the impact that has on people's thoughts or judgments they make when they see that on a CV, because you're not going to put in your CV, well, actually, the reason for these moves is because my husband was deployed. You just put that down, or my partner was deployed. And there's an awful lot of judgments made about that without asking why.
Yeah, I mean, especially on your CVs. I mean, if you've had lots of jobs, I mean, I've had lots of jobs since 91 because of getting made redundant. But now I think the way they do CVs now, they don't want to know all your jobs. They just want to know what skills you've got and what you can bring to a company.
I think it's definitely getting better, Karen, and hopefully it'll continue to get better. Yeah.
Is that your dog's entered your long narrow boat?
No, she's outside.
In terms of your experiences, then, having said, I suppose, having stood on all sides of the fence, if you were to meet somebody who was maybe thinking about transitioning from a career in service in the military, or who was maybe the partner of somebody who was in service, what advice would you give them, Karen?
If they're coming out, I'd say, do as many courses as you can. Think what you want to do in civilian life. Do the courses. Say John was very lucky. He was a recovery mechanic, but he did a lot of mechanical courses up in London, and that gave him a job to go to I came out and I had nothing other than could I join the police, which I couldn't do because I'd got 2 young children. So you have to think really carefully about your choices. And if you're marrying into the forces, it's not glamorous, like they say. It's not a glamorous lifestyle. You've got to be a bit tough.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you would just spend every night crying.
Well, thank you very much, Karen, for your time.
You're welcome. I hope it all makes sense.
Yeah.
It does, yeah. I hope you have something nice planned for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Karen. It was lovely meeting you.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I'll see you
at Breakfast Club. Take care.
Thank you. Cheerio.
Yeah, will do.